In the work that we're about, I'm always asking myself this question: who are you when it matters most? Now, what do I mean by this? Let's just say in good times, everything's going well, there's no problems, there's no breakdowns. You can imagine everyone's in a pretty good mood. On the contrary to that, if you're broke and lonely and society seems to be falling apart and your health isn't good, then life seems pretty negative. And so I think there's this kind of constant battle between this positive and negative view in life where we are trying to chase one thing and run away from the other. And in doing so, the way that we may interpret quotes, the way we may interpret ourselves, interpret each other, is going to be colored by our current experience. Our perception of the future shapes our experience of the present. I used this example this morning when I was on a walk with my partner. I said, okay, let's just say with everything we've got going on right now, I said to you, hey, next week, do you want to move house? It was ambiguous. It's like, well, I don't know really where we're going. We've got a lot going on right now. Oh my God, moving house just seems like a real hassle. Like, I don't know if I want to do that. No, oh my God, no. I definitely wouldn't want to do that, right? Okay, cool. What if I said to you, hey, we've just won $1 million beach house, but the only condition is we've got to move next week? It'd be like, fuck it, drop everything. Let's go. Let's do it, right? So it's not the moving of the house that's inherently the problem. It's the relationship to everything around it, specifically what comes next. So this idea of telling people just to be present and not worry about the future and past, I understand the intention behind it, and yet we are also past and future based creatures. Just because we choose to be more present doesn't necessarily make us more virtuous. It doesn't make us a better person. It just means that we've got the ability to be present, and then 2 seconds later, we'll be in the past and the future again. And the question is like, do you then beat yourself up and do you feel guilt and shame for that? Or are you able just to choose the past, the present, or the future? Part of our experience of the present moment is going to be informed by the future that we're living into. So if we imagine that we're moving into this, luxury beach house next week, suddenly life's looking pretty good. But if next thing you know, we don't know where we're going and we're moving back into mum's basement, suddenly like, oh my God, I don't know how I feel about that. So even our experience of right now is informed by the future we're living into. Now, obviously we all know that life has ups and downs. And so it's not always necessarily going to be on the up and up. And then maybe tomorrow, some days it's not going to be a great day. And the question is now what? Is our everything up until that moment sort of just ruined? Or are we able to brace ourselves what's going to come next and know that, okay, whatever comes next, we will face that bridge when we get to it. So part of the things that I want to explore is these ideas of when we see these quotes and when we talk about these stories and we talk about the things that are going on in our life, it's always going to be colored and informed by the individual's experience of life, not only in the present moment, but the future they're living into. And so I think there's a lot of people whose future is kind of bleak. And bleak not because it has to be, but bleak because they've chosen it to be, they've decided to be, they're resigned to it being that way. Something happened and that's just the way it is for me now. You got to understand. And so you could imagine why people would be pretty flat about the future, about even the current experience, why there would be a lot of apathy. Because if what's coming next sucks, then like what's there to get excited about? Part of exploring these kind of concepts is trying to also offer you and anyone else who's interested the opportunity to change your future and to change the present moment. But to do so, we would have to actually start to think about, well, how did we kind of get here? And ultimately, where do we want to go with it as we are? With that said, one of the quotes that I saw this week was, competition happens at the bottom. The people at the top are collaborating. There's a lot of dichotomies being created here. There's a top and a bottom. There's a collaboration and a competition. And there's this sort of suggestion that bottom is bad, top is good. At the bottom, you're competing. And at the top, you're collaborating, which can also infer that everyone who's competing is at the bottom. And everyone who's collaborating is at the top, and everyone who's at the top is collaborating, everyone at the bottom is competing, right? So it's that same sort of like reversed sort of psychology there. Now, we both know that you can compete at the top and you can collaborate at the bottom. The question is, well, what is the top, what is the bottom, and why is there this sort of weird morality? Because you say these quotes and people get inspired by it, but the next thing you know, that's where people are like, I'm taking the high road, not the low road kind of stuff. Just because you say that doesn't mean you're not actually doing the thing, nor is there actually any morality to it until you attach morality to it. So let's have a look. Competition happens at the bottom. In the moment of it mattering most, it's going to be that present moment and the future you're living into, right? Let's just say it could be a low stakes situation. It could be a high stakes situation, but matters most obviously suggests that this situation has a level of high stakesness to it. And what that usually means is there may be a fear of the future, right? As in, if I make a mistake here and I mess it up, it could, be disaster. But if I get it right, it could be fantastic. So it's a real like a, nail biter of a choice. So if you take competition and you go, well, is it a low stakes competition? You're playing a card game with your 4-year-old niece, or is this competition high stakes poker or some Olympic race or something like that? And the idea of it being is, Is there actually a difference? Is there a difference in playing a game with a toddler versus being at the elite level of sport? Now, obviously, from a technical layer, from a social layer, from a financial layer, we would argue that, well, yeah, there's way more upside, way more downside. You could really change the trajectory of your life. Or over here, it's just a game. When you think about competition, like, where is it just a game? And when is it now like everything's on the line for this? And if we don't win, then, we're going to get attacked by a mob of people, right? So this is where it gets very, very clouded. And this is where you can see this personal perception of what it is and what it isn't gets muddled based on the way we feel about the situation. So competition is nothing more really than a game that we've chosen to create, or life has created, that you have multiple things ultimately trying to achieve one goal. And the one who is going to achieve it best, whatever the metric might be, speed, quality, time, whatever, is deemed to be the superior, the best one, the one that, gets all the spoils of war and everybody else suffers, right? So there's already this idea in our mind that competition is kind of risky and scary, winning is good, losing is bad. So this idea of competition happens at the bottom is this sort of suggestion that competing is for people who are not very sophisticated, and they're not very evolved and they're sort of a bit stupid. Whereas the other hand, people at the top are collaborating is the suggestion that, well, once you're a finally evolved human being, you're no longer competing, you're collaborating, which means you're working together towards the same goal and everybody wins or everybody loses, as opposed to it being an individual. Why I think this is interesting is because we can sometimes live by them, right? And then those kind of sayings become mantras for our life, and then we start making choices all based on these things, and they become part of our identity. And so let's just say you lived by this quote: I'm somebody who's a collaborator, I don't compete. And yet that is not necessarily true. Just because you call your competition collaboration doesn't mean you're not competing. So is collaboration bad? Is competition bad? Here's the reframe that I want to offer you for any of these things. Is leadership good or bad? Is helping good or bad? Is supporting good or bad? Is selling good or bad? Is negotiating good or bad? The better question that I like to sit with is, so who are you when you're competing? Who are you when you're collaborating? That invites an opportunity for us to start exploring the nuances of that situation. We might start exploring, well, what do you mean by competition? What do you mean by collaboration? And that creates an opening for us to actually start exploring how we move around our own feelings and our own behaviors and our own fears and projections, depending on the game that we're playing. And we may start to recognize that in certain competitions, I might be playful and calm and kind, but in other competitions, suddenly now I'm taking very seriously and I'm aggressive and I'm domineering and that sort of stuff. Why this is important is to understand the conditions that influence who we're being in the moment. And as we recognize, as the stakes start to ramp up, well, this is where someone might practice something all day long at practice. They compete with their best friends. It's no big deal, but you put them under lights with a buzzer and suddenly now everything falls apart. At the end of the day, you might look at it and go, but it's the same person shooting the same ball at the same hoop. But the context has changed. The context, not necessarily even in the result, but just in that person's mind, the significance of the moment. So when we think about competing or we think about collaborating, the better question rather is, should we compete or should we collaborate? Are we at the top or the bottom? I understand the desire to sort of like sort people like this, because then you can go, I'm a this kind of person, and that's good. But I think a much more helpful perspective is to say, well, who are you when you're competing? And who are you when you're collaborating? And then as we start to dig into the weeds of, okay, well, let's look at all the situations you've collaborated in, which ones went well, which ones didn't go well. And we start to understand, well, what was it about that situation? What we start to unpack here is there might be people who love competing so long as they know they're going to win. Now, do they actually love competing, or do they love winning and fear losing? People who say that they would like to collaborate provided that they get to share the load, right? Because what if they had to do it on their own? So sometimes collaboration can be a subtle suggestion that that person doesn't trust themselves to go alone. Sometimes someone who's competing may not actually have any self-worth unless they defeat another person. So inside of these very, very, what seems like very simple concepts in society where that's a good thing, there is sort of our hidden agendas and our hidden motives and our hidden feelings, which ultimately fuel the way the outcome is experienced. A lot of fixation in life is about the goal. Our addiction to sort of like, what's the outcome you want no matter what the cost is? And yet I just don't buy that. I don't think a lot of people are actually willing to pay the price of what it's going to take. A lot of people may say, well, yeah, you want the body, you want the riches, you want the girl, the guy, the beach house, whatever, but you're not willing to do what it takes. What we're actually speaking to here is there is a goal that we want, but then there's also an experience of life that we want to have in our pursuit of that goal. A lot of the time, we may look at the goal and all the different pathways to that goal, but we don't actually really inspect what our emotional experience might be like. And so this is the age-old story of like, it was very easy to start a business, have an idea, but can you keep it going? a week, a month, a year, 10 years from now, can you do the same thing day in, day out and do it consistently with a smile on your face? That's when suddenly everything changes. And yet we might say that's the indicator of success. It's not just your ability to do it once or twice, it's to do it thousands of times repeatedly and not lose spark for it. When we sort of sit there and think about how do we want to actually show up in this world, how do we want to compete, how do we want to collaborate, how do we want to help and support, it seems to me that the best way to not only go through this process in defining the goals we want, but is also to create a process that we believe that we will enjoy the experience of life while in the pursuit of that outcome. So when we think about who are you when you lead, who are you when you help, who are you when you collaborate, who are you when you compete, it's not the competition, it's not the collaboration, it's not the leadership, it's not the thing that's often the problem. It's going to be the way that we relate to the situation when things get really scary. Not when it's easy, but when things get tough, when it matters most. And then that's when we start to run into our limitations. That's when we run into our insecurities, our insufficiencies, our deepest, darkest fears. And then that's when the flavor changes. That's when the tone changes. That's when you feel everything get tense. That's when you notice when things sort of take a bit of a dark turn. So if we don't actually start to inspect our relationship to collaboration, our relationship to competition, our relationship to leadership, there is going to come a point in that experience where we're going to meet our limit. And that can be the time when we start making choices that can sabotage or destroy or unpick everything that we've done to that moment. So as I unpack some of these quotes, I find they're really interesting because while it's easy to share them around and we get likes and we go, oh my God, that's amazing. I love being able to look at the rigor and go, okay, what was even about that quote that you really, really liked? In this particular situation, we discussed it, that we prefer to be collaborators than competitors. And yet deep down, I'm a competitive person, but I also love collaboration. And the opportunity here is not try to pit them against the other saying, well, which one's better? Is it competition or is it collaboration? It's to recognize, well, who am I when I'm competing? Who am I when I'm collaborating? And more specifically, who am I when I'm competing and winning? Who am I competing and losing? Who am I when I'm collaborating and it's playful, and who am I collaborating where it's painful? These are the deeper questions that I love to explore with people because I feel like it really reveals who you are when it matters most. And once you get that awareness and once you get that perspective on yourself, you are given this new range of freedom from which to choose. You do not have to keep going down the same path. But simply having more information or trying to force yourself to change doesn't necessarily work. The greater opportunity here is to be able to sit with yourself fully, look at yourself fully in the mirror, appreciate, wow, I get really, really upset when I start losing. And then start to say, okay, well, is that how you want to be? And what is it about this particular situation that's so much scarier and losing in this situation than it is in that particular situation? And often what you find is once you are able to identify whatever that key little driver is, that is usually a decision that's been made about ourselves in that moment. I'm not going to survive this moment if I were to be found to be this. Once we're able to change that relationship or that experience of that moment, it's kind of surprising to see how much some of these other things completely fall away.